I'm going to be honest with you, I've been very skeptical about Warhammer the Old World's chances of success. I have half a dozen scripts talking about reviving the Old World setting in game and how I would have done it differently because I have literally nothing better to do than to fantasy book myself running a massive miniature wargaming company. I have secretly been very vocal about this to anyone who is polite enough to listen. At one point, Midwinter Minis put up with me ranting about it for a long time until he reminded me that I needed to leave his house because he had called the police. So I quietly untied him, put on my clothes, and left. I didn't go through with these scripts because my style doesn't really lend itself to reaction type videos that could easily age like milk, especially as there was always a chance that Games Workshop would pull a hard pivot away from what I thought Warhammer the Old World was gearing up to be when it was announced in 2019 and how the launch is going in the early days of 2024. And it's just as well I did, because wouldn't you know they appear to have pulled it out of the bag and produced something that looks like a viable product out of the shattered remains of the Warhammer world. Let's do a brief history session to catch everyone up to speed. Warhammer Fantasy Battle was the premier wargame of the 80s and 90s for many people, until the juggernaut of Warhammer 40,000 came along and stole everyone's lunch money. Official support was killed off in 2014-15 with the End Times books to pave the way for the Age of Sigmar. Then along came the renaissance of Games Workshop with the true-scale Space Marines and Warhammer Total War, which was such a success that in late 2019 Games Workshop announced that they were going to bring back the Warhammer world. After all, a few months later, people were buying and painting every Games Workshop model they could get their hands on after being sent home during the pandemic with pockets full of free government cheese. At that time, it seemed like Games Workshop could do no wrong. After all, if you can get a plastic Zope miniature to instantly sell out, why not try and reboot Warhammer Fantasy Battle? And once you're committed to that, why not recreate the entire Kislev faction in plastic complete with war bears? Of course a PC gamer would buy this. Who wants to just have an army summoned up with the press of a few buttons? After all, what else are you going to do with all those Zoom meetings your work wants you to join? It's like running the pork pie stand at Salute. The product was practically selling itself. Unfortunately, a few years later, the hangover hit. These days, we live in a post-pandemic world where people have found out exactly what 10% inflation looks like year on year, and tubs of Lurpak butter come with security tags. It looks like somewhere along the line, the scope for Warhammer the Old World got scaled back. Usually, when a YouTuber mentions things that might have happened at a Games Workshop internal company meeting, it's framed in the same way to something that might have happened at Epstein Island. However, I put it to you that those meetings might very well have saved this game entirely, because whoever was in charge of the Old World release has managed to very cleverly list all the pain points in the original Warhammer Fantasy Battle and tried their best to mitigate or neutralise them. So here are the 5 reasons I thought it would be a disaster, followed by the true genius of this idea. Number 1. The use of 20 to 25-year-old plastic kits to bulk out the initial armies was going to make it a visually tough sell against the newer model kits of Age of Sigmar. However, the designers have cleverly picked the best kits and put them up for sale. The mounted squires and grail pilgrims still look extremely characterful. And the Heavy Metal team has just about managed to get the Ancient Bretonnia Knight kit looking good enough to be hidden in the background behind the new Pegasus Lord Centerpiece. And yes, oldendemon will be hosting its yearly Old Hammer painting competition in May again, just putting that out there. My contact details are in the description if the Games Workshop influencer team is watching. I promise not to make jokes about how wargamers all have erectile dysfunction and gout. Actually, I can't promise that. Number 2. I thought that the focus on Tomb Kings and Bretonnians was misplaced, as they typically have not been popular armies. I witnessed multiple relaunches of the Bretonnia range being met with apathy to the point that their last dedicated army book came out in 2003, over a decade prior to the setting itself being shelved. This might have been down to the sales of the game in the later years, but it also could be that people just didn't want them, or the painting scheme was just too brutal for even a seasoned Warhammer player to handle. And 2003 is the exact year the first Tomb Kings army book came out, sadly right in the middle of the massive rush for the Lord of the Rings miniature game, and around the time the company realised exactly how much money they could make if they focused on the stuff that sold. But what's happened is that the Warhammer team has advertised those Bretonnia Knights as 6-man units, so you don't need to worry about buying too many, and introduced a new unified paint scheme, so you don't need to walk into a hobby shop and ask for one of every paint to make an army. Plus, the Tomb Kings should be an ideal prospect for using those contrast paints on. I mean, unless you had a plan to edge highlight all 93 models in the box set. Number 3. Age of Sigmar has cannibalised a lot of really cool Warhammer Fantasy units and reimagined them. And, well, they have. There's no getting around the fact that the big sellers in the fantasy line were ported over to the Age of Sigmar universe almost immediately, and the factions in the old world feel like you've turned up late to your restaurant dinner and found all the nice stuff is sold out, the chef has gone home and the staff just want you gone by 10 PM when the orgy starts in the kitchen. Squeakhoppers, Lizardmen and Sylvanath were big sellers. Skaven and the reimagined Undead and Chaos factions also have made a true home there where you can have wild miniature designs without needing them to rank up perfectly. Now, let's make no mistake here, a lot of these old models are stone cold classics, especially if we get the Peri sculpts for the Empire of Man. But if the factions had sold well, they would have made the jump to Age of Sigmar rather than getting left behind. A 100 model strong army with a quartered paint scheme is a tough pill to swallow, especially if the Empire of Man, as it's now known, does not typically sell well. And when stock doesn't sell, it doesn't get reordered. And when it doesn't get reordered, it doesn't get produced, and that's exactly how we started on the road to the end times in the first place. Legacy factions will get free PDF releases, so players who are still sitting on a square-based Lizardman, Skaven and Vampire Count army will only be out of luck if they are one of the tiny fraction of players who have the burning need to play in an official Games Workshop tournament. Chaos Dwarves are still lost in the wilderness. Chaos Demons never really looked the right fit for rank and flank battle systems. Dark Elves are, let's just say, problematic in many areas, and Ogre Kingdoms might either be seen as a little too far in the grey area of racial stereotypes that could cause future issues, or might simply be queued up for an Age of Sigmar refresh sometime soon. Besides, 17 factions was far too many to support anyway. Number 4. Centerpiece models sell armies. People love them. Just looking at the results of Miniature of the Year, you have a list of all the Centerpiece models in the game. When it comes to a public vote, size and background beats a really nicely proportioned miniature any day of the week, which is a shame for the Lizardmen and the Cities of Sigmar release. And unfortunately, Warhammer Fantasy has never really been about truly large-scale miniatures for historical production reasons. Some old metal models will literally collapse under their own weight. You also have to take base size into consideration and how the model fits into a giant combat without knocking every model around it over. However, it looks like we are getting large-scale Centerpiece models anyway. The Pegasus Lord and the Necrolith Bone Dragon fit quite nicely in with the new base sizes, so we can avoid a repeat of that period where large models had to contort themselves to fit on the smallest bases possible. It looked like this time frame was set 500 years before when steam tanks were rolling around, but thanks to some clever retconning, steam tanks will be much less rare on the battlefield. No word on war wagons, but we'll see how that plays out. Number 5. This hobby is mainly driven by the cult of the new. Therefore, does re-releasing old stuff generate the kind of buzz as a fresh new model kit? It turns out I didn't realise how much of a success Cast on Demand has been. My superhero alias, Jordan Sorcery, did an interview with Jim Butler, who revealed that the old metal Kazakin kit made $250,000 in 1 week on made to order, compared with about 800,000 when they were originally launched in 2003. There's that date again. It shows how far Games Workshop has come and how much nostalgia sells. And that Warhammer Quest Trollslayer model here reminded me of the war dancer that won the last year's oldendemon painting competition. That's the second plug in this video. Maybe I should plug the merch as well. Or maybe the Ko-fi subscribers. They're getting giveaways at the moment, those lucky silver and gold tier ducks. Is this too much plugging in one spot? It feels like too much. Anyway, the real genius here is that Games Workshop just reactivated a potentially huge IP to have in their back pocket. Do I want more Total War and Vermintide games? Absolutely, but now Games Workshop is advertising and developing the old world on a regular basis, more games companies should be interested in using it. Do I want Baldur's Gate 3 but Warhammer? Sure. Hearts of Iron or some other grand strategy game but Warhammer? Yes please. Assassin's Creed set in a city of the Empire could be a good shout. Games companies have tried using the Age of Sigmar universe, but it hasn't worked well so far, because that universe is more of a sandbox designed to accept new miniature ranges rather than the basis for any kind of traditional storytelling, and therefore it struggles to capture people's imaginations. It's also going to be easier, and by easier I mean cheaper, to adapt TV shows to the Warhammer Fantasy universe than either Age of Sigmar or 40k. Pitching a show to a streaming service and using Game of Thrones or The Witcher as an example shouldn't be too hard. Find some Renaissance period clothes, find a medieval country house or a small town in Europe, and you're off to the races. You have the setting for any story you want to tell around the age of the three emperors, either before or after. Drachenfels is also a good shout. Find a Romanian or Austrian castle, book it out for a month or two, and you've got yourself a great gothic horror show. While we're on this topic, I'm going to point out the elephant in the room. To quote Watchmen here, the Superman exists and he's American. Or rather, the Superman exists and he's a 40k fan, and together we're getting a live action 40k show on Amazon. Well, the trouble here is that Amazon have exactly one chance to get the first live-action Space Marine on screen, and if they pull a Rings of Power or Wheel of Time on us, then that's going to be the last 40k TV show you'll see for a generation. Because getting good-looking Space Marines in Astartes is one thing, getting a live-action Space Marine looking good is going to be prohibitively expensive, and then incorporating them in a 10-part TV show that stays true to the original source material while telling a compelling story would stretch David Fincher or Christopher Nolan's abilities to the max. And if Amazon money can't get it right, then no one else is going to want to touch that IP. I am also available to write a brief plot outline if anyone is interested. No? Okay, fine. Meanwhile, you just need a convincing dwarf costume and you've got the base for the entire Godric and Felix series sorted. Godric and Felix. Both these models would work perfectly for Old and Demon the painting competition in May, just saying. However, Warhammer the Old World could still fail. The real issue is that the world of past hobbies is typically seen through rose-tinted goggles, and that's coming from a channel that is banking on trying to grab handfuls of the nebulous, nostalgic nimbus cloud that is post-millennium wargaming. Sometimes the smell of opening up an old box or a magazine is a trigger that literally takes your breath away, and sometimes that smell is just asbestos, and those chest pains need to be looked at by a doctor. There are still big hurdles left to clear before we can all sit around mashing our square-based regiments together and drinking pina coladas in the retirement compound. People want to see what that mystical past age was like, but sometimes when they've seen it once, they don't want to see it a second time, especially if it looks like £72 for a unit of 6 mounted squires, the smallest basic army being 77 models strong, and 15 to 20-year-old kits being sold at 2024 prices. But hey, as with anything else Games Workshop related these days, just buy 2 core sets, flog the spare rulebook and have fun, assuming they come back in stock anytime soon. I mean, the real joy here is going to be hunting through eBay to find Bronzino's Galloper gun to go with your exiled Bretonnian Knight army, or finding some long out of print sculpt to use as your army's general. Or you can always buy Kings of War. Look, Mantic has loads of stock of Kings of War. Look at all those shelves. I'm not sure that that's a good thing though. If you want to see more of Warhammer Fantasy, tell me in the comments below so I can start covering it in more detail. If not, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.